Hey there, I'm Dr. Doug Campbell. Often in my college history classes, I find that students are sometimes a little bit confused about the difference between primary sources and secondary sources. Since this is a super important distinction historians make between the various types of evidence they use to make arguments about the past, it's very important to understand the difference. As briefly as possible.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
A primary source is a piece of evidence from the time period which you are studying. The raw materials of the past, if you will. A document or a piece of evidence from the past that has survived into the present that students and historians can look at to make arguments about the past. That stuff, primary sources. A secondary source is anything written after the fact about the past. So anything written in the present day by a contemporary scholar or historian or commentator, looking back on the past and making arguments about the past, that stuff, call those secondary sources. And obviously, both have their place. Any good work of historical scholarship is going to draw on both. It's going to look at evidence from the past, as well as to consult what their scholarly peers have to say about the same topic and to take those arguments into account. So you really do need both, but it's important to understand which is which. And there is a reason why the primary sources, the stuff from the past, are called primary. And historians, our bread and butter, the stuff that we focus on when we study the past are actual written documents. Like there is a reason why the era before the invention of writing tends to be referred to as prehistory. History really only starts when there are pieces of writing we can look back on and study. Any piece of writing from the past obviously counts as a primary source. Whether that is a legal document or a law code, whether it is an economic record, whether it is a religious text, like say the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita or the Quran, if it is a poem, diaries and first-hand accounts, personal correspondence, anything written down counts as a piece of evidence from the time period which it was produced. Obviously, those are not the only sorts of primary source evidence one could take a look at. Any of the physical remnants of the past. So, your prototypical pot shards and arrowheads, funerary remains, ancient architecture, any actual stuff left behind from the past. You can also study that to make some meaningful arguments about the past. That tends to be the purview of archaeologists. Archaeologists essentially like to go through the trash of people who have been dead for a long time, which is, there's a certain irony in that. If you like to go through modern people's trash, that makes you a creepy stalker. If you go through the trash of people who have been dead for hundreds of years, you're a scholar. And obviously, I was tremendously disappointed when I found out how little archaeology has to do with punching Nazis and bullwhips and stuff like that. I felt like I was lied to by all of those Indiana Jones movies.
Boss.
But still, obviously, it has its place in historical study. And clearly, if we're talking about more modern topics, then you can bring in film and audio recordings of historical figures or events. Interviews with people who lived through them.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
By definition.
Exactly.
That sort of stuff. There's only a relatively small sliver of the past that's available for, but that stuff counts as primary source evidence too. So any of that stuff, the archaeology, the written records, any of the more modern media records, as long as it was produced during the time period that you are attempting to study and make arguments about, it counts as a primary source. And to be clear here, whether or not something is a primary source has nothing to do with the format. It doesn't have to be an original copy of a piece of historical evidence. So a document that was written, say, in classical Athens, in the 5th century BC, that counts as a primary source, even if you have it in translation because you can't read ancient Greek, even if you access that on a website, like the website version of the document is still a primary source. Format doesn't really matter. What matters is the original of that document a product of the past? Anything written after the fact by contemporary scholars looking back on the past, that's different. That is a secondary source. And again, there are a wide variety of secondary sources, some of them high quality. If you find something that is written by an actual scholar, a PhD historian, somebody who teaches at a college or university, any source published in a peer-reviewed scholarly journal or in a book published by a major academic press, those are high quality secondary sources. It can get worse from there. Obviously, in this day and age, you know that any idiot can have a website or a social media account and say whatever the hell they want. In fact, to judge by the 21st century, not only can any idiot have a website, but every idiot, apparently, has a website. So, buyer beware. I do have a video actually on how to tell a good website from a bad one when we're talking about historical research, but I won't go into that here. Just to note that there is a wide variety of secondary sources out there as well. So there you have it. That is the difference. So to keep that distinction in mind, primary sources, actual evidence from the past, historical documents and artifacts, the raw materials of the past. Secondary sources, works by modern scholars looking back on the past and making arguments about it. Make sure you use both. Both are important when push comes to shove. Always want to emphasize the primary source evidence. Hope that helps. See you later.